The room was too bright for the kind of news I was about to deliver. Fluorescents buzzing like mosquitoes, fake cheer radiating from a motivational poster behind my chair that said, "People are our greatest asset." I didn't write the policy, I just had to say the line. Effective immediately, "We're adjusting your salary by 60%. I said, not even flinching. I knew what was coming next. The silence. That awful, still silence like the moment before a deer bolts into traffic. He blinked once, slowly. That was it. He didn't yell, didn't argue, just stared at me like I was a commercial break interrupting a war movie. The corner of his mouth twitched, but he kept it together. "Interesting," he muttered, barely audible. "Non-essential," I repeated because it was protocol. "These cuts are performance neutral, not personal." Everyone knew who we were really targeting. The ones who weren't loud, who didn't network at happy hour, who didn't play ping pong with the VP like their pension depended on it. He was just old school, quiet, efficient. Paper notebooks, handwritten notes, contracts signed with pens instead of DocuSign. He didn't belong anymore, or so we thought. He nodded once, got up slow like his bones were counting the seconds and said, "Yeah, non-essential paperwork can get real tricky. You folks be careful now." Then he left. No scene, no snark. Which made it worse, honestly. I wanted him to yell. I wanted a fight. Something I could blame later when this got messy. But here's the thing about guys like him, they don't explode. They ferment. By the way, if you've made it this far into the story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like the video. 97% of people forget to do it, and it really helps the team keep stories like this coming. Seriously, thank you. Later that afternoon, I passed him in the hallway. He was scribbling something into a tattered brown notebook that looked like it had seen more daylight than our entire legal team combined. I joked, "Still clinging to the analog life?" He didn't even look up, just kept walking, whispered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. Something about contracts older than HR. Over the next few days, I noticed people avoiding him, like he was radioactive. They didn't know about the pay cut, we kept that internal. But somehow, the scent of dismissal had already clung to him. In a place like this, silence isn't privacy. It's punishment. The CEO passed him in the hallway that Friday. Didn't nod, didn't blink, just glided past like he didn't even exist. Which, to be fair, was how most of us treated him before. He was the guy who stayed late, who never joined Slack threads unless tagged 3 times, who submitted reports in full sentences, not bullet points. He was a relic, a walking vestige of a time when people actually read fine print. And I didn't see it coming. When he left that day, he didn't take a box. No framed photos, no farewell wave. Just that damn notebook tucked under his arm like a dead man's journal. If I had known what was inside it, what he'd buried years ago, I'd have stopped him in that hallway, right then and there. I'd have begged. Because when the wire alert hit our inboxes Monday morning, and the news flashed across Bloomberg about the hostile $400 million buyout, that notebook, it might as well have been a nuclear trigger that he came in on Monday wearing the same worn-down boots and that faded navy button-up he always wore when he meant business. Not that anyone noticed. Most folks barely looked at him anymore, like he was a ghost still clocking in out of habit. I watched from across the lobby as he tapped his badge and walked through the turnstile without a word. No nods, no greetings, just the soft squeak of his soles and the shuffle of a man carrying a weight no one could see. By 9:30, people had already started whispering. "Did you hear they slashed his pay? 60%? Jesus, why not just fire him? Cost cutting. They're trimming the dead weight." That last one came from some junior analyst in product who hadn't been here long enough to know who built the contract framework she was now riding to a bonus. I watched her flip her hair and giggle like this was some office soap opera. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because I helped write the damn script. In the break room, no one looked up when he walked in. Even Mary from finance, who used to swap crossword clues with him, suddenly got real interested in her yogurt. The fridge buzzed louder than the conversation. He poured his coffee, black, no sugar, like always, and sat down in the corner booth where no one could get behind him. I'd seen that move before, from combat vets and fired execs, people waiting for the knife. And yet, he didn't seem rattled. He opened that old leather notebook of his, creased spine, corners curled, ink bleeding through a few pages. It looked like it had been dropped in the rain, run over by a truck, and resurrected by sheer stubbornness. He flipped through a few pages slowly, calmly, like a priest reviewing a funeral script. Then he stopped on one page, smiled to himself, and underlined something with a pen that clicked like a gun hammer. No one else noticed, but I did. The CEO came striding through around 10 a.m., flanked by his usual swarm of sycophants, laughing too loudly, shaking hands too hard. When he passed our guy, he didn't even blink, didn't register him, just floated by like he was invisible, which might have stung more than open contempt. I watched the man's jaw clench, not in anger, but in restraint, like he was holding back something massive, something final. A younger dev tried to give him a polite smile in the hallway an hour later, then immediately glanced at his shoes, ashamed. That's how it spreads. The infection of irrelevance. HR doesn't have to fire you to kill you, they just change your label and the world follows suit. I caught him later by the stairwell, flipping through that notebook again. He didn't say a word, just nodded once like we shared some unspoken truth. And maybe we did. I asked, half joking, "Writing your memoirs already?" He looked up, eyes sharper than I'd seen in weeks. "Nah," he said, tapping the page gently. "Just revisiting some old paperwork. The kind folks forget until it's too late." Then he walked off, no rush, no panic, just purpose. And I swear I heard him whisper, "Funny thing about ghosts. Sometimes they haunt the living right back." He waited until the office lights had gone cold behind his eyes. Didn't head straight home, didn't hit a bar. Just drove, windows down, wind clawing at his sleeves like it wanted to peel off the layers they'd wrapped him in all those years. His neighborhood was quiet, one of those backlit corners of town where everyone either owned the place outright or had long given up pretending they'd ever leave. The kind of neighborhood where you nod at the mailman but don't ask his name. Inside, his place was clean but lived in. Books stacked like bricks on every surface. No photos, no art, just function. But near the back hallway closet, behind a false panel in the drywall, sat a metal file case so old it looked like it had been dragged through every era of corporate warfare and buried for a reason. He hauled it out slow, wiped dust from the latch, and opened it with a key that still lived on a frayed string around his neck. Inside, folders, dozens, all labeled by hand, all yellowing around the edges like relics from a forgotten religion. He flipped through them with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. 2014, amalgamation with Belridge Systems. That was the one. He opened it, and there it was. Clause 12.7. C. In the event of hostile acquisition attempts, key stakeholder consent is required prior to execution of merger activities. Key stakeholder. His signature was on the appendix page. Ink faded, but still there. He let out a breath that sounded more like a laugh strangled halfway through. Then he whispered it, barely audible in that dark little living room. "Non-essential, huh?" He sat back on the floor, legs crossed like a man about to meditate or dismantle a bomb. Maybe both. His fingers traced the page again, then flipped to the attached amendments. They hadn't changed a thing. No revisions. No superseding clauses. It was buried, sure, but legally, it still lived. It was a time bomb in fine print, and they had no idea they were sitting on it. He poured himself 2 fingers of cheap bourbon and left the file open on the table. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel discarded. He felt dangerous. The worst part? He hadn't written that clause for revenge. Back then, it was just a failsafe, something to protect integrity in case the suits got greedy. A little insurance policy for a future he thought might never come. But now the wolves were at the gate, and he was the only one with the key. The next morning broke sharp and colorless, like the sky had decided even sunlight didn't want to show up for work. But the news did. At exactly 7:46 a.m., phones started buzzing. Not the usual calendar reminders or Slack pings. This was different, urgent, aggressive. By 8 o'clock, the entire floor was vibrating with energy nobody could name yet. He sat in his usual chair, same scuffed laptop, same chipped coffee mug that said, I survived Y2K, watching it all unfold like a man at a train station watching a wreck through binoculars. The headline hit the wire like a sucker punch. Belridge Capital submits unsolicited $400 million hostile buyout bid for Ravelin Systems. The oxygen seemed to get sucked out of the building in one collective gasp. A woman from legal dropped her reusable smoothie bottle. Two directors slammed their office doors so hard the blinds shivered. Someone in finance sprinted, not walked, sprinted, to the boardroom with a stack of printed spreadsheets like they were about to negotiate nuclear peace. He watched it all quietly, sipping his coffee like he was listening to jazz. Emails exploded. Emergency meetings got triple booked. HR issued a stay focused and positive memo that hit everyone's inboxes with the force of a wet tissue. You could hear them scrambling through the walls. Suddenly, everyone who thought they were untouchable was checking their contracts, asking questions with too much voice and not enough breath. And him? He didn't say a word, didn't ask what was going on, didn't raise a brow, just clicked open a blank document, then slowly, methodically, began copying one single clause from a scanned PDF onto a clean page. Line by line. Clause 12.7 C. Key stakeholder consent. The irony wasn't lost on him. They'd called him non-essential. Now the whole building was shaking under the weight of a clause they didn't even remember existed, but that he had authored. Quietly, patiently, in the margins of a deal they'd long since forgotten but he never had. Across the floor, a manager was yelling into his headset. "We need to know now. Who the hell still has legacy signing rights from the Belridge merger?" He smiled, just a little, folded the printed copy of the clause and tucked it into that old notebook, right between a grocery list and a sketch of a server cluster layout from 2016. By 10 a.m., the CEO was pacing outside the boardroom, tie loosened, sweat creeping through his starched collar. Legal was in full damage control mode. The words due diligence and asset freeze and board approval were flying like shrapnel. He walked past them on the way to refill his coffee. One of the analysts looked up, about to speak, but something about his calm expression stopped her cold. No need to announce anything. The fuse had been lit days ago, and when the detonation hit, he'd be the only one wearing earplugs. The boardroom looked like a crime scene without the chalk outlines. People were hunched over laptops, flinging jargon like it could stop a train. Finance was sweating through silk. Legal was white-knuckling fountain pens like weapons. The CEO stood at the head of the table, arms crossed too tight, as if posture alone could hold the company together. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, voice flat and cracking. "We are in control of this narrative. This isn't a takeover, it's an attempt. A hostile offer, not a done deal." A few nods, most of them hollow. The general counsel looked like she'd been awake since the Bush administration. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the CFO cut in, voice a little too loud, a little too desperate. "The deal can't proceed without stakeholder approval." Silence. Everyone turned. The CEO blinked. "Which stakeholder?" he asked slowly, like he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. The legal team rustled through files like raccoons in a trash can. One finally pulled a folder from a red binder, flipped it open, and froze. Her face drained. "Clause 12.7 C, she whispered. "Key stakeholder consent is required in the event of hostile acquisition." She didn't finish the sentence. The CEO tilted his head. "Define key stakeholder." Another pause. Pages shuffled like wind through leaves. And then, just as quietly, "We never formally dissolved that designation after the Belridge acquisition. It defaulted to the signing party from the legacy contract side." That was when panic took shape. Not loud yet, just the early tremor of an earthquake before the glass starts falling. While that room began to crack at the seams, 2 floors down, he sat in the back corner of the data ops bullpen. Same damn chair, same mug, same battered notebook open like nothing had changed. A few folks glanced over, noticed him for once. That's when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. But he knew. He answered with a dry, "Yup," a breath. Then, "This is Cynthia from legal. We're reviewing some legacy documentation." We were wondering if by any chance you still had access to the original Belridge contract files. He leaned back in his chair, watching a group of directors rush past the glass walls like a herd of spooked cattle. Sure do, he said, nice and easy. Filed and labeled. Unlike some people. Another silence. Could you bring them up? He let the pause stretch long enough to make her sweat. Then, I could, if I felt essential enough to walk up there. He hung up before she could respond. Back upstairs, the CFO was swearing into a napkin. The general counsel said the word liability 3 times in one breath. And the CEO just stood there, blinking at the wall, as the full picture sank in. They didn't own the deal. Not unless he said yes. And they'd spent the last month treating him like floor lint. He was staring out at the parking lot when the CEO found him. The old man stood by the break room window like he was watching ghosts walk to their cars. Same cracked mug in his hand. Same loose tie over a collared shirt that hadn't been ironed since the merger. He didn't turn when the CEO cleared his throat. Didn't move when the man said his name. First time in weeks, maybe months. Got a minute? The CEO asked, trying to sound casual and failing so hard it cracked in the air like a bad windshield. He finally turned, raised an eyebrow. Always got a minute for senior leadership. They stepped into the abandoned HR conference room. The one with the outdated posters and dead fern in the corner. No assistants. No distractions. Just the two of them face to face, finally. The CEO closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, as if trying to remember how humility worked. He opened with, we're in a situation. He didn't reply, just sat down slowly and waited like a poker player who already knew the river card. The CEO's throat clicked when he swallowed. You're listed as the key stakeholder on the Belridge merger documentation. That clause, we didn't think it'd ever come into play, obviously. Obviously, he echoed, deadpan. The CEO forced a tight chuckle, but his eyes didn't join in. Look, I'll be straight with you. We need your signature. The board can't move forward with any counter-strategy or defensive positioning unless that clause is addressed. He leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, and tapped his pen slowly against the edge of the notebook he'd brought just to let it be seen. My signature, he repeated, tasting the words like aged bourbon. Ha! The CEO tried to regain ground. I know there's been some miscommunication, some friction. HR's recent handling of internal reviews. Well, let's just say there were oversights. Oversights, he said, nodding slowly. Yeah, like slashing someone's pay by 60% without even asking what they still control. Silence. Thick. Unmoving. I mean, he went on, voice casual like radio static. I was told I was non-essential. Hell, you didn't even look at me when you passed me in the hallway. Now suddenly, I'm holding the pen that decides whether the company lives or dies. The CEO fidgeted with his cufflinks. Gold ones. Probably a retirement gift from someone else's labor. I'm asking, no. I'm respectfully requesting you consider the bigger picture. He chuckled just once. It was dry, papery. Mean, the bigger picture? I am the bigger picture. A beat passed. He leaned forward, lowered his voice. You built this place on noise. On titles and Slack threads and ping-pong tables. But what you forgot, he said, tapping the notebook, is that this company stands on paper, on contracts, on the old bones buried in cabinets nobody checks anymore. He stood. The CEO looked up, smaller now somehow, like his custom suit didn't quite fit right under the weight of it all. You wanted lean, he said, heading for the door. Well, congratulations. You're lean. Stripped it all down so thin. The only thing left with substance was me. He paused in the doorway. You'll get my terms soon. Until then, I suggest you remember the difference between non-essential and foundational. And then he left the CEO standing there, quiet, humbled, and very much aware, for the first time, that the man they'd tried to erase was the one holding the master key. The bid went public at 9:02 a.m., just as most of the office was settling into their second cup of coffee and first round of performative productivity. Every monitor in the building lit up with the headline like it was gospel. Belridge officially declares terms of $400 million hostile bid for Ravelin Systems. No more whispers. No more rumor. Just hard numbers, concrete terms, and one cold reality. This was real, and it was happening now. The market roared like a drunk at a poker table. Stocks surged 18% in the first 20 minutes. Finance pretended it was good news, grinning like idiots in denial. Comms sent out a "We remain confident in our independence" memo that read like a corporate suicide note in Helvetica. But in the boardroom, behind glass that muffled panic but couldn't contain it, they were tearing each other to pieces. He watched from his corner on the fourth floor, silent as usual. Noticed how the same execs who'd treated him like office furniture now avoided eye contact like he was radioactive. The same HR director who once called him a legacy cost couldn't even make it through the elevator ride without breaking into a sweat. Desperation had a scent. He knew it well. Inside that boardroom, things were unraveling. "We need him now," the CFO barked. "You don't understand. We're dead in the water without that clause resolved. Belridge knows it. Hell, they banked on it." The VP of Legal hissed. "Then pay him. Double. Retroactive reinstatement. I don't care. Just get his damn signature." But the CEO was already gone. Stripped of ego, pacing like a man trying to remember when he lost control, when the chessboard flipped and the pawn grew teeth. Back on the operations floor, he calmly logged into his personal email and reread the message that had landed quietly the night before. "We're aware of your position in the original Belridge-Ravlin merger. Should you be open to discussion, we'd like to formally invite you to consult on transition strategy moving forward. Discretion guaranteed. Compensation, of course, commensurate with your value." He didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, he printed it, folded it neatly, slipped it into his notebook between the clause and a hand-drawn org chart of the old Ravlin structure, back when people still built things on trust and paper, not on Slack reactions and empty TED Talk slogans. Around noon, the director of strategy stopped by his desk. Nervous smile. Fake friendly tone. "Hey, just wondering if you had a minute? The board would really appreciate your input on the stakeholder matter." He looked up, slow. No smile. "Didn't realize my input mattered." "Oh no, it definitely, absolutely does." "Interesting," he said, tapping the edge of his notebook like a metronome. "Because last time I offered input, I got a 60% pay cut." She squirmed. "That was a mistake. Things are different now." He nodded. "They are." She stood there awkwardly, hoping he'd offer something. He didn't. Just let her drown in the silence she helped create. Across the floor, screens were flashing. Rumors of a shareholder revolt. Emergency town hall scheduled. Interim teams being prepped in case of a forced merger. And all of it, hinged on one man they called irrelevant not even a week ago. And the man? He was calm. Still. Because when the storm finally arrives and everyone's scrambling for shelter, the guy who built the foundation doesn't run. He decides who gets to stay dry. The knock came after hours. Not a Slack ping. Not a scheduled calendar invite. An actual human knock, tentative, brittle, almost apologetic. He didn't look up from his desk right away. Just finished the line he was writing in his notebook. "Power is quiet until it isn't." When he opened the door, the CEO was standing there. Paler than a winter moon, shoulders rounded in a way that didn't match his title. Behind him trailed the HR director, the head of legal, and the CFO, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, like maybe a dentist chair or the edge of a freeway. "We were hoping," the CEO said, voice wobbling like it had to crawl through pride just to speak, "to chat privately, just us, about resolving things." He let them in without a word. Didn't offer seats. Didn't offer coffee. Just stood with his arms folded while they fidgeted under the weight of what they'd become. Legal cleared her throat. "You are, as we now understand, the legal key stakeholder under the Belridge Clause. The deal, any deal, cannot proceed without your approval." The CFO added quickly, "We're prepared to reinstate your full compensation package, retroactive to the date of the reduction. Bonus included. Equity even. Whatever's fair." He said nothing, just turned, slow as a clock hand, and looked at the HR director. She couldn't meet his eyes. Not after what she said in that room. Not after branding him non-essential like she was stamping meat. Now she was clutching a legal pad like it might shield her from what was coming. He finally spoke. "You think I want a raise?" Silence. "You think this is about money?" He took a step forward, voice flat as a steel table. "If I wanted revenge, I'd let Belridge buy you out for scraps. Watch them gut this place and sell off the bones like antique furniture." The CEO swallowed hard. "Then what do you want?" He paused. "Let them twist." Then he walked to his desk, pulled a file from the bottom drawer, and placed it gently on the table between them. Inside, a simple document. 1 page, typed clean, titled, "Restoration Protocol." The HR director blinked. "What is this?" "My terms," he said. "You reinstate every single employee affected by your so-called efficiency strategy. Everyone you quietly pushed out, demoted, or humiliated in the name of cost-cutting. Full back pay. No NDAs." "That's—" Legal started, but he cut her off. "No negotiation. You thought I was dead weight? Fine. But those people, they kept your systems running while your leadership played musical chairs with titles." He turned to HR. "You'll draft a formal letter of acknowledgement. Not apology, acknowledgement. That your metrics failed. That your definition of essential was flawed. You'll circulate it internally. No weasel words. No passive voice. And you," he added, pointing at the CEO, "will step down at the end of the quarter." The room went still. CFO stammered. That's extreme." "So was gutting your company from the inside without knowing who held the knife." They stood there, stunned, powerless. He walked to the window, stared out at the blinking skyline like it owed him something. Maybe it did. "You came in here thinking I wanted to be saved," he said quietly. "I don't. I want this place to remember what it cost to ignore the people who built it." Then he turned around. "You want my signature? Those are the terms. You've got until noon tomorrow." And just like that, he walked out of his own office, leaving them in the rubble of their own making. The boardroom was packed. Too many bodies, not enough air. Ties loosened, heels kicked off under the table, sweat bleeding through high-thread count shirts. It wasn't a meeting anymore, it was a last supper. He walked in last by design. No fanfare, no folder, no phone. Just that same leather-bound notebook under one arm and the look of a man who'd stopped needing approval the moment they labeled him obsolete. Heads turned as he entered. Some tried to smile. Most didn't bother. They all knew what was about to happen. The CEO stood at the end of the table, paler than ever. Voice hollowed out. He held a printed copy of the original Belridge contract like it was a holy relic. Creased at the edge, a yellow highlight glowing from the center of the page like a warning light. Clause 12.7, Section C. The CEO began, voice unsteady, each word falling like it weighed 10 pounds. "In the event of a hostile acquisition, the transaction cannot proceed without the consent of the designated key stakeholder." His eyes froze on the name. The paper trembled slightly. "That's you?" he said, not even phrasing it as a question, just an admission, a realization, a confession. Silence snapped through the room like a whip. Executives stopped mid-blink. Lawyers stared at their shoes. HR looked like she might puke into her branded reusable water bottle. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly walked to the head of the table. His seat now, whether they knew it or not, and dropped into the chair like a man sliding back into his throne. He opened the notebook to the page with the clause, glanced at the printout in the CEO's shaking hand, and nodded once with quiet finality. Then he leaned back, calm, centered, unmoved by their chaos. "Funny thing about being non-essential," he said, voice low and level. "Sometimes, I'm the only one you need." No one spoke. No one moved. It was over. The $400 million deal, the panic, the scrambling, the calls, they all funneled into this moment. And every single person in that room now understood the same bitter truth. They had tried to erase the one man who could stop the bleeding. And now, he held the pen, the clause, the power. He didn't smile. Not really. Just closed the notebook, stood up, and left them with the kind of silence that echoes for years.